I gotta figure out how to get my camera above me and tilt it down. I'm not trying to turn my nose up at anyone, but yeah, I just want to rap a little bit. I just want to rap a little bit about the Bible. Maybe we understand a little better. I spent a lot of the last couple videos talking about how a lot of arguments basically about who the two nations are, the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom. And with all that rhetoric and conjecture, um, usually that comes after the proof. But I started with that. So let me do a little bit of proof tonight or this afternoon. It's still early yet. Probably fix myself some vegetarian spaghetti for the third night in a row. Pretty tasty. And I'm not sure where to kick off, but let me start from the top. And that is with Abel and Cain, the two brothers. And this is where one of them had been favored. So this one is a continuing motif. Elder Mike's been talking a lot about it. John Collins, Tim Mackey from the Bible Project been talking a lot about it. This recurring motif where there was the firstborn, uh, namely Adam, and then Cain, and then Ishmael, then Esau. And you can even talk about Reuben. So even though I will say that Judah is the firstborn compared to Joseph, it's just that there's both. And so we can never understand the Bible if we try to have a deductive, unified field theory. There's many various opinions. And so we can get, that's why you can't sum this up in a single point. So the dispensationalists will rap about a certain thing they deduced. They deduced the first covenant and the second covenant. And they think that both of them are futuristic. So the dispensationalists are futuristics, dual covenantists. And they would, and Calvinists, much the same. But Calvinists are much more Christian about. They're much more single covenant, though they have a hard time in the West, at least since the Crusades, but probably more since Moses Mendelssohn, have changed. The Germans have always been weird about this, about appropriating identities and things like this, but I think it comes largely from resentment from using Latin letters and things that kind of shows a lack of scholarship of antiquity in Germania. Even though that's where the top science comes from today, it's as E. Michael Jones says, they were chasing pigs in the forest, and so that's how Abel is a figure for the Jewish people, is much the same as the church, as Jesus said, from righteous Abel to Zechariah. And so Abel is righteous. And Cain is like the sanctuary city that, although he was hated, Esau was hated, although he's cast out, although he's outside, this is by Ezekiel called the Eastern or Kedem. This is, these people, they can't even hardly have sheep or anything. They just put their tents up and move to the next place. This is how Abraham lived. And this is a fairly recent history, that this comes after the Persians had already been very powerful. They might have not been called the Persians, but then they might have been called, Sumerians or Akkadians or different things. But the Elamites were only a name at this point. So anything about Babylon to Timbuktu would probably just be a name. And so when you look at Arabian people today, they have big bushy beards, long noses, green eyes, and these are all things of there are absolutely, I mean, being close to Ethiopian, there are in Arabia outer elements, of course. There are curly haired people and very curly haired people and all kinds of things. But that's essentially what it means when it says in the Bible, the mixed multitude, the Arabian. And this is where Paul went when he first had Jesus visit him. The apostle went out to Arabia. And this is where the faith comes from. So when we talk about this faith from the Akkadians, where we get Semitic languages from, that this is way into the beginning of the Bible. So the Bible's way later, that 1,000 years or so, that it's all just ancient history. And so they can look at the Assyrian history and draw some of their own history from that in terms of ancient times and everything. And so, I'd always wondered how come when the Hebrew boys got Aramaic names from the Chaldeans, how come they sounded even more Hebrew than they had. I'm sorry about that notification. Let me see if I can deal with notifications. So why did they get uh you know why did they get more Hebrew names, right? And why are the names of the clans of Esau sound so Hebrew, so much like the ones of Israel? And what's this thing with Zora and all that, and Sierra, with that happens to be spelled with the Shem, you know, the letter, the letter S. The Germans too make the letter S as a sh sound, and so what does Seth represent? Seth is the replacement, and I've done a lot of videos on replacement theology about this is what Samuel, I think, is saying, Kings, about the replacement. And so I'm going to try to talk about as much about the replacement as possible and becoming the firstborn, and who's the inheritance and all that. So Edom is Cain because it's outside, but you got to understand the original Israelites were inside, to a certain extent, because this is where you grow crops and what's Galilee of the Gentiles, and it's called Basha Farms now, maybe, or something along those lines. I can't remember. And so you're getting near Tyre at this point, who happens to be a lot of the similar letters to Zion. But this was at one time, they say Solomon had Hiram Abiff like build him all these structures. So the Gentiles had built this, and so the Gentiles were that they were inside, and it's these would be the Canaanites, and these would be the remnants of the Hyksos that were the original Israelites. These were the priestly shepherds of the hill country. And so when they talk about Sargon and stuff, this is way back to the times of the Tower of Babel. And this wasn't like the beginning of all history, like a lot of these things were vestiges of settled life. And so this creates the evolution of a mandible and different, things that of eating grain and growing grain, which made them especially vulnerable to the sea people. And this is when they built up like Jericho and stuff like that, where you have walled cities and these are upon walls upon walls upon walls over time. Um, so you don't know where the earth and the stone might be different therein, but along cliff faces they do tend to build stones like so you don't have landslide and stuff like that. Um, but so Seth replaces Abel. Cain is eye for an eye, like that there's going to be exact punishment. He's still going to get his promise, he's still a son of Adam, go forth and multiply, but like Lamech, he's got this 77 time retribution about him. That this is what Jesus said is like the law. You'd have to forgive somebody 77 times. So the law to extinguish itself, this is like when it says they hated Jesus, they had a measure against him. They hate us. They have a measure against us in Greek. And so the measure, Jesus said, let the Pharisees measure. Because if they ask you to go a mile, go two. That this is the handwriting and ordinances that are against you. This is what the Deuteronomy said. Let this be what separates them. This is the curse. This is the curse of the law. As said in 2 Corinthians 3:6. It says, it says, who has made us sufficient to be ministers? Not me, these people who are the ministers, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And so this new covenant, all you got to do is go to Hebrews 13, and it says here in verse 20, now may the God of peace, so there's more than one God. This is the God of peace who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant. That's Hebrews 13:20. It says, now made by the God of peace who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by blood of the eternal covenant. So let me fast forward to John 3. Let me go to John 3. First John 3 and 10. Or 1 John 3. But before we go there, let me do John 9:9. It says, some said he is like he, others said he is like him. I said I am he. So like, let me preliminary say like doesn't mean the same. Similar comes from the word the same, but it doesn't mean the same. It means so he could be like him, he could be him. So if they say one substance with God, Jesus one substance with God, that means he's of a like substance. And so it says here in Hebrews 7:28, which came after the law appoints the Son who has been perfected forever. And so I'm going right now to 1 John chapter 3, starting at verse 1, it says, "Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God," as Paul said in Romans 8. "Therefore, the world does not know us, because it did not know him." Remember, Jesus, when he said, he spoke to them in parables so they wouldn't be saved. And when he came into Jerusalem, he spoke all the judgment. And remember how they were blind? And it says in John that he made them blind. And Paul said and Paul in Romans 9 compared them to the Pharaoh who was made blind. It says, "Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has hope in him purifies himself, just as he is pure or made righteous." This is Abel, the righteous of Abel. But Abel passed on, and Seth exists in his stead. And so if we move on to verse 7, it says here, "Little children, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous." And so when the Deuteronomist was adding to Genesis, or probably maybe even the priestly source, because Ezra was big on the bloodline. So, but like I said, there's two sources. Like when we talk about Elijah, this is a different narrative than the priestly source that just said you had a righteous king and he kept the priests. It's no, that there's this man of God who has prophecy, and he gives 3.5 years of proclaiming judgment on the people, and then he judges them, and then after the judgment you have 3.5 years of miracles. Well, just as 70 is at the front, 70 is at the end, so you have this, but it flips around, so it comes to a head and to a close. This is the parabolic nature. And so this high point is what brings us to the biblical age. And this biblical age, I would say, is 0 AD, give or take 200 years. And that's where a lot of people get twisted, is because they assume that what the Bible exists as in Isaiah was what they had before they knew what they know about the downfall of Israel. That yeah, a prophet can predict it, but that's not what's going on here. It's written that way so that the reader understands that nothing happens without first being revealed. But that's something that's going to be much more difficult to understand in these upcoming verses of John, because we almost have like a deist perspective where, because he bestowed all authority on the son inherits the promise, and he is sorry. So it says here, "Let little children, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous. He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning for this purpose." So the devil being represented like of Cain, the first sinner. and that the rebellion, is central to this idea. And so, for this purpose, the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whoever has been born of God does not sin. Born of God does not sin, for his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin because he has been born of God. And so, when we look at John, we go to his gospel, and we see here in chapter 5, verse 26, it says here, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment, also because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in graves will hear his voice and come forth." And this happened really shortly thereafter. This is what happened at the crucifixion. And to understand the crucifixion, you have to look at 70 AD. And this is the ultimate sacrifice. And Masada is just case in point that people would rather perish from this earth to be right. And this is what I almost got into in the Septuagint when it comes to First Esdras. That what are the most valuable things to a king? What's the most powerful things to him? Wine, women, and bowling, right? And so with these three things are his downfall. Eat, drink, and be merry. And so, but one is greater than this. And this is the role of the prophet. The prophets always have to go through it. Remember all the things Ezekiel went through, and then none of them are even believed. The ones that are really favored and stuff are often lying, just telling your well wishers and all that. And so, for that reason, this is like Moses, that although he's not Aaron, he's got a direct line with God, the man of God. And so that's why the Deuteronomist that's why the priestly source protested so strongly, is in effect because he needs to, while still alienating the Samaritans as calling them nations, not completely. Remember, a K-calf turned, though that might be a Deuteronomist source, it probably likely is. So Ezra's not even going to weigh in on that, because he does seem to evade certain other subjects. You have this idea that's so strongly of this replacement theology, of this replacement theology is so strong in the Deuteronomist that the priestly source protests too much, that they make a point that it's all about the seed, and so you get these stories of just these really remote things happening. The probability of these things happening are incredibly remote. So that's to indicate that God played his hand in making sure that this seed lives on. So this is what they were taking as a refuge, that there's a certain promise. And to the dispensationalists, this even exists to this day, that there's some seed promise. And this is dealt with directly in the New Testament. You either believe in the New Testament or you don't. Because who is John giving woes to? Who's Jesus giving woes to? To all of those that said that they can just, as the Calvinists do, take refuge in the fact that they're elect. And that gives them license to sin. And often on racial grounds, like it says in Deuteronomy 19:18. Leviticus 19:18, where we derive a very crucial doctrine: love your neighbor as yourself. This isn't the Ten Commandments, but the Ten Commandments does reflect this most important commandment. This is natural law, something that Martin Luther King Jr. dealt a lot with. So I'll have to turn real quick to Isaiah 52 because I'm getting too far in my argument that I need to get back to the beginning. So it says here that here in Isaiah 52, awake. Now therefore, what have I here, saith the Lord, that my people is taken away for naught? They that rule over them make them howl, saith the Lord, and my name is continually, every day blasphemed. Therefore, so this occurs in Ezekiel, where he says in 36, for his name, right? He'll respond. Therefore, my people shall know my name. Therefore, they shall know in that day that I am he that doth speak. But we know who this is, who the Zion is. It says Jerusalem, but that's because Jerusalem was taken over by Ezra and all them, his folk. And so this is the replacement people. This is Seth. Seth is the replacement person. So although Seth is not older than Cain, he gets the inheritance. He's blessed with firstborn status. So Israel is taken by the Jewish people. It's expropriated. But they weren't Israel. Israel was the nations. They had the Ashura poles and everything. This is all through the book of Kings. And that's how come they were sent away and taken captive, kicked out like Cain, because of the covenant of judgment. And so they were the ones that went down to Egypt. Israel, Joseph went down to Egypt. But the Jewish people of the north, the northeast of the wilderness, they came from the northeast. This is the Herodians. They united the Ammonites and the Nabateans and everybody under a single tutelage of Babylonian captives that claimed to be from the other side of the river. And so this is where you get the Hebrews. This was after somebody who was a sheep. Sheep means Israel. Cyrus the Great, the Mede. Jethro was a Mede. This is why in Media, this is where you got Medina, the whole wilderness. This is not the Ugaritic and Hurrianite people. Yes, Abraham went up through that way. That's where he learned the customs from him and his family dwelling up there. But then they went down to Egypt. So this is from before the Herodian times. The same pattern, but it's happened multiple times. And so the people that originally possessed the land, the Egyptians, the Cushites and stuff, they were actually ruled by the Hyksos. And this doesn't mean Hebrew. This means Akkadian. And this has to do with Sargon of like Genesis chapters around 10, like way back in the days. Like, and so who are we talking about when we talk about Israel? This, as it says in Genesis 48, I showed you the other day, that Israel will become many nations. So when Jesus went out to Galilee of the Gentiles, they said, why don't you do it in your own town? He's performing all these because he knows his sheep will hear his voice. So he went out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That is not Judea. His ministry went out to them to come back home. They'll go back into his fold. And those that are already there, he spoke all these woes and judgments to. And they were the ones invited to a wedding that did not attend. They were the ones that were left to tend the vineyard, the garden, right, where God's presence is. But they got sent east of Eden. They're no longer in Zaire and stuff. They're in the wilderness where you can't even hardly export. And it's hard to grow things. And it's hard to even have sheep and stuff like that. And so it's so who is Israel? It says who it is right here, because Israel was relevant more to Isaiah, even though it was written after that. So there's lots of Jewish source in here. There's lots of material that's patently Jewish, that it's though supposed to be written as though it's to who was the firstborn, the one getting the inheritance. But this isn't the firstborn because they were born first. This is the firstborn because God, it says here, gave them that land. So it says, it might be another, I think it was 49 where he talked about what he gave him, but you know, how he displaced the nations. And you know, this is the in-group, out-group of Numbers 24. You can see the change where the oppressed person becomes the oppressor. And this is supposed to be some sort of great equalizer of redemption. And so this is what happened with Ezra and them. They're saying that, oh yes, although, just like they're saying of a second Exodus, they're saying, yeah, we didn't get baptized through the Jordan River and through the Nile River and the Red Sea and all that. We got baptized through the Sabbatean River, the Tigris and Euphrates. And so we were back here in exile. So although we didn't go to Egypt, we still had our exile. And so because we were oppressed by the nations of the north, like let's say Assyria and all them, who were the people that set up these nations in the first place. That's why Hezekiah paid tutelage, is because the sovereignty was whose coin is on this. It was these great powerful nations of the north that could make all these, you know, iron suits and stuff like that. And so you know, I mean, all this talk about shackles and swords and stuff wouldn't even have as much meaning had it not been into the Iron Age, which is a lot later than a lot of people say. But because the Hittites were so much further ahead than everyone else in their metallurgy, that they'll use the fact that the Hittites had iron to somehow say that's the Iron Age and therefore everybody, that's what they're dealing with. But that's not really true. So the Iron Age is really a lot later than they say it is, as well as when the Bible is written. And so Judah was Cain, being the one with the curse, the eye for the eye, the refugee city, 77 time retribution, um, women as property, expiation for uncertain murder. But remember, with women as property, that Mary could not show her tokens of virginity, that the sinful woman was accused. She was the one who's accused. And so I think I need to go to 49. So much of my argument, I think, is in Isaiah 49, and here I am in 52. But you got to understand, 52 is right before 53. So when it comes to talk about the servant, it's going to be introduced here in 52, even though it was introduced earlier. It's really going to hit its fever pitch in 52 here, before 53. So it's more of the rising action. And so here we go. Let me stay right here in this area. The Bible, like, when you read through it, the book, it's pretty good order. I really like the order that the Christian Bible's in. It makes a lot of sense that as these ideas build and evolve, the order they put them in. It seems like there's a lot of rhyme and reason to it. And so it says, break forth into joy. So this is this time where they had this idea of, although we're in the Holocaust now, that we're a burnt offering, that we're being poured out, that we're being just like how the Lithuanians felt. And like rappers today, they'll say, I got shot, I've been through it, I should be dead, and so and now with zombie culture and everything, it's like the fact that since ancient times they had this idea that, some were sacrificed so others could live. And so before the time of Abraham, you have Abel as the sacrifice. And so this is the sins even that were committed in Israel and Judah and all that, that they emulate the ways of the nations and the pagan gods and stuff like that. So that's what Abraham symbolizes in terms of, yes, this is the culture we're born out of, but there's this other God, because yes, this bad God, the one that wants retribution and sacrifice and servitude, that's the maniacal kind of tyrant who is the kings, and the kings were the fact that the Bible was written under these times of great kings, whether you give an early date, like some do, to the time when the Assyrians and the Egyptians were powerful, and so they make these cameos in the Bible, but it would really be for a time, I think, much later, namely as the Romans were getting very powerful. And so the Romans took on this identity of Esau, like, with being red and being abandoned and much, even the Israel, even the Ishmaelites and different people, that this is built up by the Deuteronomists and even earlier sources, the early Israelite sources, pre-Judaic, the Elohist sources of what the nations with their Asherah poles and everything, they were the priests of the area long before the Bible was written, and they become Cain when Numbers 24 happens, when Ezra and all them come back from captivity. This is the restoration of the promises. So what a lot of people are looking to is future. This was written into the Bible patently, spread throughout Christianity for a long time. And where a lot of people get twisted is they don't see that the later prophets, such as Daniel, who's a consortium of amalgamation of different prophets, and all the minor, a lot of the minor prophets, a lot of these are late sources, and so this is after the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So here we go. Let me, before I get into too much further into Isaiah 52 back to 49, let me go into a little bit of history. So I'm here on the Wikipedia page of John Hyrcanus. It says beginning in 113 BC, Hyrcanus began an extensive military campaign against Samaria. So this is what Ezra's talking about, that they don't want any part to do with. If you look at Ezra 4, no Samaritans. You look at Ezra 9, Idumeans are fine. So Hyrcanus placed his sons Antigonus and Aristobulus in charge of Samaria. This is Hyrcanus. This is the king of the Jewish people. And so, although the siege lasted for a long, difficult year, Hyrcanus was unwilling to give up ultimately. And they might say that that's why the priestly source exists, is because Zerubbabel and Sheshbazzar, they couldn't be kings. They could only be priests. And this is how Joseph was like a priest. This is how the Cadians got their start. So it says Samaria was totally overrun and destroyed. And so what do they say about them? Oh yeah, they had pig's blood and all the normal abominations of desolations. So they will say that this place of the nations, K-Calf turned, they got judged when, here comes this messianic figure. And so the kingdom was spreading like a lot. Like if you look at the land today, it's much, much bigger than you would think. I mean, like, it's not bigger than current day, but that's because current day Israel is Idumea. Like most of their geographical area is Idumea. And right, what are they fighting for? Judea and Samaria. And so you sit there thinking, well, so what do they control? Gaza, like the Philistines? And it's like, no, they don't control Gaza. They control the land of Hiram Abiff. Like this is after the Sea People. This is the Philistine land. So what they control right now isn't even Israelite land, it's Philistine land. And with the exception of Jerusalem, and that was on purpose during the war of 47 and 48. And that's so they can do all these religious fanatics, get the religious fanatics involved. And that's by design, because when you get this kind of martyrdom, that's what this, 6 million people had to die for this to happen, martyrdom. This is the angle that the Deuteronomist is coming from. That's like, well, because we suffered, because we went through it, therefore. So this is like Jonah, although he wanted all this hate, he got swallowed by the whale, died, and came back after 3 days. And so Hosea talks about this, his servant, and so who is this one that's outside? It's the one in the tent. And so it says here, John Hyrcanus was able to take advantage of unrest in the Seleucid Empire to assert Judean independence and conquer new territories. In 130 BC, Demetrius II, the former Seleucid king, returned from exile in Hyrcania. There might have been like Mithridates, is the king. I'm not sure. But they talk about him in Ezra, that he's considered the satrap that's putting all the gold, accounting for all the gold given by Persia to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Even though they don't have walls, they're going to put all the gold there, even though it's not populated or peopled. So, furthermore, the Seleucid Empire itself fell apart into smaller principalities. The Etrurians, probably related to the Sea People, that same as the Italians and all that. The Ammonites of Transjordan. Well, I thought they weren't supposed to be ever in there. And the Arabian Nabateans represented independent principalities that broke away from Seleucid control. Well, that's got to make it easy for John Hyrcanus to set up a empire that would later be controlled by Herods, who married into the family. And it says here, and so this is the priestly source, that Hyrcanus was determined to take advantage of the dissipating Seleucid Empire to increase the Judean state. Hyrcanus also raised a new mercenary army that strong contrast to the Judean forces that were defeated by Antiochus VII. And the Judean population was probably still recovering from the attack of Antiochus and therefore could not provide enough able men for the Hyrcanus-led army. John Hyrcanus' army was supported by the Judean state, once again by funds that Hyrcanus removed from the tomb of David. Beginning in, I don't even know what that means. What source is this? Bickerman. I don't trust it. Beginning in 113, Hyrcanus began an extensive military campaign against Samaria. Hyrcanus placed his sons Antigonus and Aristobulus in charge of Samaria. So Herod, when he ruled, he too had Samaria. The Samaritans called help, eventually received 6,000 troops. Although the siege lasted for a long, difficult year, Hyrcanus was unwilling to give up. Ultimately, Samaria was overrun and totally destroyed. Defeated the city of Scythopolis. The Scythians, that's the people that dwelt there, the Cadians, the northerners. The inhabitants of Samaria were then put into slavery. And this is what the Torah is talking about when it talks about the priests getting like all the Torah. That's what the Torah is. The Torah is not Elijah and all them. That is the Deuteronomist, the replacement. This was the original firstborn that was destroyed and kicked out. This is Israel. This isn't Judea. This is Northern Kingdom. And as it says here in Isaiah 52, verse 4, and let's say the Lord God, my people went down for 4 times to Egypt and sojourned there, and the Syrians oppressed them without cause. That's Northern Kingdom. And so Northern Kingdom, aka Samaria. And that's also known as Jacob and Ephraim. And so Hyrcanus placed his sons upon conquering the former Seleucid regions. Hyrcanus embarked on a policy of forcing the non-Jewish populations to adopt Jewish customs. John Hyrcanus's first conquest was an invasion of Transjordan in 110 BCE. John Hyrcanus's mercenary army laid siege to the city of Medeba and took it after 6 months siege. These victories, Hyrcanus went north towards Shechem and Mount Gerizim. The city of Shechem was reduced to a village, and the Samaritan temple Mount Gerizim was destroyed. So this is the Messianic age. This is when the Gentiles would be destroyed, the Ammonites and the Idumeans. And that is because the Idumeans represent the sheep that were not obedient, that did not listen. So this messianic idea starts when the rebels are destroyed, and that is when David, became the Messiah or fulfilled a messianic purpose. One of the messianic purposes, it says in the Bible that there is not a single male living of Amalek or Esau. Not a one. That's what the Bible says. Here you are talking about this evil seed, serpent seed, and all this kind of doctrine. I'm of the good seed, and I can count that as my righteousness. I'm elect, and all kinds of craziness. So the military actions against Shechem have been dated archaeologically around 110. Destroying the Samaritan temple at Gerizim helped ameliorate John Hyrcanus' status among the religious elite and common Jews who detested any temple to Yahweh outside Jerusalem. Hyrcanus also initiated a military campaign against the Idumeans, the Edomites, it says here on Wikipedia. Don't block me, YouTube. It says I'm reading Wikipedia. During the campaign, Hyrcanus conquered Adora, Maresha, and other Idumean towns. Hyrcanus then instituted forced conversions of Idumeans to Judaism. This was an unprecedented move for Judean ruler. I disagree. That was what David did. But it was easier for him to just slaughter the men and take the women, probably for David. And so this is who were the people of Jerusalem that fought the Romans. They were the Zealots. Simon the Canaanian, the Zealot, Simon the Zealot. So they're the ones that would rather die in Jerusalem than, like Jesus said, go out into all the nations. But he's not going out into the nations so that they can all come back to Jerusalem. That's never part of it. But that's how a lot of these dispensationalists feel. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. Remember, Jesus is a life-giving spirit. So in 52, it says, in Isaiah 52, it says, break forth into joy, sing together, sing a new song, it should say. About appropriate right here. The Bible shouldn't say anything I should say, but I'm sorry. Depart ye, go ye out from thence, touch no unclean thing. So it says, as many were astonished by thee, his visage was so marred more than any man. What am I reading? And form more than the sons of men, so he shall sprinkle many nations, and the kings shall shut their mouths at him, for which he had been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard they shall consider. The Lord has made bare his holy arm, made bare his holy arm in the eyes of the nations. and in the end of the earth shall see the salvation of God. So this messianic age was what John Hyrcanus was doing. He was fulfilling this purpose. And this is where these late prophets are saying things like this, like his dominion will have no end. He'll set up a rulership that will have no end. But there is an end. Like if we go right here to um, 1 Samuel 2. And we scroll all the way down to, let's see, so 1 Samuel 2:17. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord. Men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded in linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat. And let's scroll down to 1 Samuel 2:25. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat him? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. And the child Samuel grew on in favor before the Lord with men, and there came to Eli from God a man and said unto him, Thus say the Lord, did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, and when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house. So this is the northern kingdom, Eli up in Samaria. And did I not choose him out of the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer? So this is the original Israelite source that the Deuteronomist is talking about. He's talking about Israel, but with the knowledge of the captivity in Babylon. To offer mine altar, to burn incense, to wear ephod before me. And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make thyself fat with the chiefest of all things, of the offerings of Israel my people. Wherefore God hath said to Israel, I say indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me. For them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. And so Mary, Jesus' mother, took on a very poor status, like a nun. And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, in all wealth which God shalt give Israel. And there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. And we know the Messianic age is long life in the Old Testament. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, but there shall not be an old man in the house. Thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, in my wealth, which God shall give Israel. So after this, there was David, and let's talk about David. But before we do that, let's finish what I was saying about Isaiah 49. I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh. They will be drunk. This is Isaiah 49:26. I'll make your oppressors eat their own flesh. They will be drunk on their own blood, as with wine. Then shall all mankind will know that I am the Lord, the Savior, the Redeemer, the Mighty One of Jacob. But this is actually what Jesus does, is give his blood. He represents Esau. He represents those outsiders that aren't Israel. And then in Second Temple, those outsiders became the insiders. So it's hard to understand, but Esau represents Jesus, the salvation. That's what the Shem in his letter means. Letter Shem in his name. So shoot, the last one Isaiah, was it 49:15 I just read? Okay, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. And so that is Cain, that he's kicked out, but you're not allowed to destroy him. He's got a special purpose. That these are the clans of Esau. Okay, the clans of Esau. So let me get into that. Okay. So it says, this is Ezekiel 23, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, the Son of Man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother, and they committed harlotries in Egypt. They committed harlotries in their youth. There were, well, this isn't really technically true, is the Judah at the time was part of those that went down to Egypt. But that's not Judah now. Judah, like, they became a separate nation, the nation of Edomia. And so, but this is after the exile. But we're talking pre-exilic. And so this is the nation set up by Samuel and all them, that they unified off Edomia with Judea. This empire, this chosen by God, man of God, Nazarite, that's what Jesus is. This outsider that, born in the deserts of Bethlehem. Nobody wants to be down in Beersheba and all that. But that's where the covenant's made, And so because he was tempted in the wilderness, just like Muhammad went through it, that now he's going to be this righteous teacher that has this wisdom. And they thought the wisdom of Timan, that these people of the wilderness had such wisdom to be able to eat and drink. And I think that, to eat and drink, and all that with nothing but desert. Think of the Tusken Raiders from Star Wars. And so, well, guess what? This coming up here, it says, and their names of them were Ohala, that's the tense, that is the Gentiles. That is the original kingdom of Israel that was pagan, that was set up for the priests to rule over the Hamitic people there. And that is the original nation of Israel. That was Ohala. But when Judah, that is Edomia, takes over through David, and then John Hyrcanus, David is the type, the model, but John Hyrcanus is the manifestation that this is Oholabah. So Lot and Abraham were of the same family. They went together, and so this is these two sisters. Well, the older sister, Abraham, is, remember, Abraham was a giant. He was one of the Gentiles, and it was through this adoption, through this covenant, through this promise, that the story is born out of. And it's not saying, oh, this guy stayed in his land. It's no, this guy went through it, and then now he's on the other side. And so it says, Oholabah the elder. So the elder here is Israel, the Gentiles. But when we get to the second temple, it's reversed. It's all reversed. It's that the older brother is Judah, and the nations are the younger brother, because they, in the prodigal son, were the ones. The nations were the ones that were living in the pigsty. They would rather be a servant in their father's house. So this is like people like Titus, Gentiles that wanted the promise. As the kings of Israel, like Solomon, eat, drink, and be merry, wine, women, and bowling, they had a degree of wisdom, but they were still missing it, because they knew that Solomon knew the highest truth was truth, the most powerful thing, the thing to live for, the thing to die for was truth. He still was of the flesh. And so that's why Cain was kicked out, because he was of the flesh. He was worried not to bring forth to God what he had. And I'm guilty of this to myself. I can't give. But who are we giving to? Is it the church? Well, only if the church is helping people, because we want to do good as much as we can. And that's what First John was saying. But who is this Oholabah? Oholabah means of my tent daughters, of the women born in my tent. And so these children of God were Seth, that they were, like born of his tent, like Isaac, Isaac, born of his tent, And so that one is the younger sister. So that is the perspective they're coming for, that they weren't the firstborn, but they got the inheritance. And so the secondborn is chronological. This is Second Temple. This is okay. So let me prove that this is Esau. And because Esau was secondborn, that's why you get confused. Because Jacob got the birthright, that's why he became the firstborn. Jacob became the firstborn. So that's the perspective Ezekiel's coming from. He's talking about First Temple, that it's the firstborn, Israel, as Hosea said. Hosea's first temple. There's lots of Second Temple prophets and prophecies. But when I talk about Hosea and Genesis and stuff, we're often dealing with First Temple. Whatever that was. We don't have much historical data regarding it. But so who's this? Well, if you go to Oholibah, well, these are the generations of Esau, the same as Edom. Esau took his wives, daughters of Canaan, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah. So that means of my tent's platform, that this is all the daughters of the desert, like Job and Jethro and all them, like those guys, they, the Midianites, who are people who are Medes who traveled into the desert and were able to get their substance. Look, it says Aholibamah bear Jeush, and Korah. This is the firstborns who died in the wilderness. That's what the avenging angel represents, the death of Esau. Well, that's what Judah is. They're saying, oh, we died in this persecution, therefore we become firstborn. And this is where a lot of the Zionists and dispensationalists are today with their thoughts, that because of the Holocaust, because of the oppression of anti-Semitism, that gives Jewish people all their power, and therefore they've won. This is like how the West was won, because after the Alamo, where they did these summary executions, the people, the tides have turned. But this was such a powerful thing that even though this is happening in inverse nowadays, people are still thinking about that one time in history as the greatest atrocity ever. So they're blind to all atrocities therein committed, like the summary execution of the Egyptians, as in the Bible, as in history, literally in the last 50, 60, 70 years. And so it says here, they're born unto him in the land of Canaan. Oh, I thought he was in the desert. No, the sons of Ishmael dwelt from Halavah to Ashur. Ashur, the same Ashur like Assyrians, the ones that are in the lineage of both the north and the east. And so if you turn to page 800 in the subsidized JPS, it's got some, not page 800, page 884. It's got some definitions in the glossary encyclopedia. It says, Ohilaba, my tent is in her. A harlot, who was made the symbol of Judah. So this is symbolic. And then Ohilabama, you add an M, and it means plural, that all the daughters, the whole platform. A daughter of Anna, son of Zibeon, like Zebulon, descendant of Shear, the Horite. Horite, that's like the Amorites. She was one of the three wives of Esau, also called Judith. Judith is what this whole Hasmonean thing is talking about. That is the restoration of the Messianic age. That's the Judaic comeback. That's what all these Daniels talking about, the kingdom that will have no end set up. That's what that is. In the times of John Hyrcanus, that's what Judith is. The story of Judith wrote that they read on Hanukkah, that's the story of the defeat by Persia of Alexander the Great, manifest in John Hyrcanus. So Alexander the Great is what the story of Judith is about. And that's also what the story of Esther is about. Esther is based on Judith, but for the Persian diaspora. So even though it talks about Assyria, it's not talking about an Assyrian event. We don't know what was going on in Jerusalem before Assyria, because it was all dealing with things north of there, for the most part. And so it is explained by some that Judith was personally, while Oholibama was that assumed after her marriage, as a foundress of desert tribes. A chief Judith, Judah, that's the same name. That's what Jochebed means. The mother of Moses. The chief descended from Esau, possibly a place name. They're all place names. In Genesis, these aren't talking about real people. It's all place names. How long have I been on this? Rapping. So, where was I? Judah becomes Seth in the second temple, and the nations become Cain. And so they would say, oh, you envy us. We have God's presence and he's on our side. So the Philistines would say, oh, God is in their camp. Oh, we're dead. They're going to beat us. And I got stink bug on my paper. I'm about to smush them. Where's my hammer? I'm tired of this. Freaking stink bug on you on my Bible. I'm smush on my Bible. You dead. Fucked up now. Damn stink bugs. Damn you. Sorry, I'm usually not that violent. I feel bad already. So, I don't want to say fine. They'll like dive bomb you. So the nations become Cain, and then this is replacement. This is what the replacement is. And so let me wrap this up. It's getting long in the tooth. So Esau becomes residents of Judah, the Judean desert, the Idumean desert. There's no boundary. But Esau is no longer represents Esau then, because Esau represents the firstborn that was disinherited. The Canaanites, the nations, the northern kingdom. And so when Judah replaces Israel in the days of John Hyrcanus, this is what Ezra is talking about, that this is all Paul is saying about the church. He's getting his ideas of replacement theology from the Bible, from the Old Testament, because that's the Judean perspective. They're not claiming to be the northern kingdom. They're claiming to be the ruddy southerner that had God's, approval to be the change they want to see in the world. And they had been cut off by the Babylonians, that this is a certain trial by fire, much the same as the Israelites went through. But they are saying they didn't go down to Egypt, as it says in John 8. We were never the servants of anyone. So that's the story of Joseph, the northern kingdom. The story of Ezra is the second temple. So when Jesus came into it, it was second temple. And so at the time, they had a king of the Jews. Like there was Herod, the king of the Jews. And you could argue and say, no, it was much later. It was when Pontius Pilate took over and all that. But the way the biblical narrative is written is that Pontius Pilate yielded all power of law to the Judean authority to determine the punishment of Jesus, where Pilate said he finds no fault in that. So according to Rome, that's not where the accusation came from. But the accusation is the end of is the power of the law, that people would not show love to each other, the greatest law, so that the law can be true, because this is how they viewed God, as being vengeful and accusative. So I never found what I was talking about. So let me see if I can run down real quick. Oh yeah, that's where it was. Okay, we're about to hit it. Okay. So it says, the sorrows of death, this is Psalm 18, the sorrows of death compassed me, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. So David is saying that ungodly men made him afraid. The sorrows of hell, that's the grave, compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In distress, I called upon the Lord. I cried unto God. This is the Jewish perspective, the Deuteronomist, to remember, like Ezekiel said. He heard my voice of the temple and made me cry before him. Even into his tears. Then it shook, the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken. So this is what Jesus is talking about. When Jesus talks about this new covenant, this new and everlasting covenant with his blood, the earth shook and trembled. Jesus is the Holocaust that makes it so that those vine dressers that were in the kingdom, they get kicked out. And this isn't my perspective. I'm saying this is what the Bible says. That's what the parable of the vineyard is about. That's why it's in the Bible. The fig tree that produced no fruit, that's what they're talking about. That's just what the Bible says. I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm trying to tell you what the Bible says. And it says they went up smoke out of his nostrils. And the reason it says that is because of this idea that the suffering gives the redemption, that God's going to save the person in distress. And so this is because the temple was being destroyed. And a lot of people thought they were losing what they had in terms of kingdom. It was going backwards. So the only way to go forward is by spiritualizing it. So there is not this biblical Judaism today. It doesn't exist. It has no bearing at all. And so it says in Matthew 22, verse 39, that the greatest commandment, to love God and everything, that the other one is like it. It's like it. It's similar. It's pretty much the same, but not exactly the same. So I would say the only difference is the designator, the designee. You designate this love to God for the first commandment, and then for the second, it's like it when you love other people like yourself. And remember, Paul said we may be entertaining angels unawares. So Paul talks about this in Galatians 5:14, that Jesus left us with this greatest command. If we turn to Galatians 5:14, it says, "For the law is fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The law is fulfilled. But if you bite and devour one another, remember when Jesus went into the temple, he said, "Zeal consumes me," meaning the authorities in there are going to devour him. The authorities of Jerusalem are going to devour him because Jesus represents the temple. So they'll devour the temple, their own kingdom, to bite at those that they think are not good for them. So it's come to the point where the whole argument is totally steelmanning them to give it an angle based on their scriptures. And instead of dealing with those arguments, they mostly just revert into ignoring them like they never happened. And so this messianic age is being argued to be taking place. And it has to do with the inclusion of the Gentiles in this mystery of faith and the exclusion of those that for hundreds of years saying God's dwelling here when obviously he's not, and would punish somebody who's godly in the name of justice, a total irony. But if you bite, I say then walk in the spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. The lust of the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another. So that's all these eat not, touch not, that's all dealing with the flesh. Maybe to attain spirituality, but it's a fleshly ordinance. So that you do not do the things that you wish. So in the negative, it's fleshly in the negative. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred. But mostly hatred and jealousies. That's what it really comes down to. That if we love each other, then we're not going to, do bad. We're as righteous as we could be. When Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath, he might not have been doing the first commandment, but he's doing the second one. So he's as righteous as he could be. He can't get any more righteous. And so he said this new commandment, when he washed their feet, he said, "This new commandment I give you, love one another as I loved you." So faith is not coming by one's righteousness. In the new kingdom, it's that they believe in this greater spirit, that you can't blaspheme the Holy Spirit. If it's good, it's good. Judgment, Jesus can blaspheme that. Like he can just say, "Oh yeah, you're not guilty." You could think of the unjust steward. You owe 100 casks of oil, make it 50, make it 10, And so all these people are getting in at the 11th hour. And a lot of people are mad because they think that they should have a chief seat for being at the table that everyone, or being in the vineyard that everyone's coming around and surrounding. But they really just want the chief seat. It doesn't matter that people are coming in and agreeing and seeing things their way. It doesn't matter. It's really about the chief seat. That's all that really comes down to. And that's what Ezra is fascinated with. That's what his name means. So it says, and he rode upon a cherub, yea, he did fly. This is what they're talking about. When it comes about Jesus' presence, I'm sorry, not his presence, but like his presence is like when you can see him in your mind's eye. His coming in the clouds is also in mind's eye, but that's having to do with like this retribution that when the justice comes, that people are going to know it comes from God. As I showed you in Isaiah 19 with the chariots. So when Ezekiel saw chariots, that's what that means. It means God's wrath, his arm. So it says he sent out arrows, but he didn't send out arrows, right? You know, he makes lightning and stuff, and so they like Zeus, you know, he got a lightning bolt in his hand, or Baal or whatever. You know, he rides on the clouds like Baal. That's just so. This is when Jesus is doing these things. That's how you know he's God. This is the enthronement. So when, but because he's represents a prophet to Judea, to Jerusalem, so he's saying the temple's going to be destroyed. This is a prophecy. You're going to be judged. When they realize that they're judged in the generation he said they did, this is Old Testament cueing that everything he said was true, that he was a prophet of God. So when he's riding like Michael, giving all judgment on the clouds, he has become like God. That's the enthronement of the Son of Man, as it says in Daniel, the Messiah, who is like God. Talked about in Ezekiel and a myriad other places. So he's pursued my enemies, overtaken them. I wounded them, that they are not able to rise. They are fallen under feet. For thou hast girded me up with strength unto battle. Thou hast subdued under me those that rose against me. So, but who's his enemy? Israel. This is all about Saul. So here, this dude of the dirty South is saying, look, look, look. I don't have a wall. I don't have a wall. I'm right here next to the Easterners. They could come take my sheep, anything. My dad could be one of them for all I know. That's why it says a son of Jesse. Well, if you look at Jesse's sister, if you look at Jesse's sister's father, that's Nahash, the snake, the serpent seed. So it doesn't take that much drawing lines to get there. And so it says, as soon as they hear me, they shall obey me. The strangers shall submit themselves unto me. That's the Gentiles. That's the north. So this is the Messianic age when John Hyrcanus destroyed Samaria. And then among the heathen shall sing praises. This is the forceful conversions that he did. So I'm here in Psalm 44. You made sheep like slaughter to the nations. That's the Holocaust. That's where the power comes from. Like the Alamo. The Alamo gives the U.S. the power to say we're victims in taking things from other people, just like how we were slaves in Egypt, even though we were running Egypt, Joseph and all of them, right? The Hyksos, that we were somehow slaves, and so that justifies every bad thing that happens. So you have made us the taunt of our neighbors. So in anti-Semitism and hate, this is where the power comes from. This is why Israel exists as a nation, and they can get the name Israel because of the great suffering. And so they would increase the suffering to get the goal. You made us a byword among the nations, a laughingstock among the people. All day long, my disgrace is before thee. Shame is come. I swear this is in the prophets too. All this has come upon us, but we've not forgotten you. Our heart has not turned back. This is not true. there was a forgetting, but when they're in exile, they felt like they remembered more. So there was a forgetting and a turning away and doing the ways of the nations that got them kicked out and made them the outsider, the Canaanites, the ones that were punished for killing their brother. Well, that's what this is. This is Esau. This is, look, Psalm 44:19. Yet you have broken us in the place of the jackals and covered us with the shadow of death. That's, if you read Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you can see the place of the jackals. That's Idumea, and that's Judea. So it's saying, awake, awake, O Lord, rouse yourself. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction? So this is what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, oh, I'm suffering. But guess what? Who's the one making Jesus suffer? Who's the one making Jesus suffer? It's not the nations. Yeah, the Romans are carrying it out, but that's as a priestly thing. Just like when you sacrifice the lamb in the Old Testament, the one making the sacrifice isn't the one doing the sacrifice. The priest does the sacrifice. The penitent one is the one who brings the sheep. The one looking for a blessing. And so this is a form of punishment because they punished Jesus, that the New Testament saying that that's the kind of punishment that's coming on them, that with this great violence of the law, the acute accusations, nobody can say this, nobody can do this, they got to do that, nobody can. This is what put Jesus to death, this attitude. Basically, where did I see that? I don't know. I could have sworn I saw some stuff with the accuser somewhere in these verses that are very similar to each other in Psalms and Isaiah, when it was talking about the servant that went through it. That's talking about Babylonian captivity, and it's basically saying that this is Satan. Satan's getting a word in, but Satan becomes the nations, because it becomes, it's like us versus them, so they identify with them, saying like, oh, I just live in your society, I have to sell my daughter as your bride, and I have no future in this world, I'm a victim, I'm a them. Well, you're a you to you. You're a you. So you can't just say I'm a them, because you're a them to me, but I'm a them to you. So you can't just base like your viewpoint, like you can't just as a landlord say, well, what would you pay for that? No, how much is it costing you in property tax? I'll pay that. You can't just as employer, well, what's your time costing? What you going to do? No, pay me what you pay all those other people, So you can't look at things from my perspective. That's my privy. And so This is what how the New Testament is saying Rome inherits Jerusalem, is because they're saying that they don't have an identity because they killed their Messiah. And not only that, people will choose to go against it. And they predicted that people will choose to go against this model of what's going on that adds up. And if you don't think it adds up, then that's really the beef. That's where we'll never agree. But I think it's clear that the biblical narrative from Daniel 4 and Romans 13 and all these other places is this is what Nebuchadnezzar was. He was the sword of God. That if God wants it, that's why Egypt was destroyed. That these things that are happening in the world were of God's power. But that's the Old Testament idea, because Jesus represents the end of the Old Testament when God has given all power to man. So this idea of we can't have these statues and revere them because those are God men like Hercules. Well, that's over because Jesus is that statue, that icon, that he has given that power. Alexander the Great, like they didn't have a father, but they still take the place of the Father on earth, that they're cast down to earth. The Father's way up there in heaven. This is a deistic perspective. And this is what the United States is built largely upon. And so, I don't know. It's really just, like how you see things. If you think that your God is going to be, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're going to kind of hate other people that do those things, and you're going to expect a lot, and you're going to be bitter and vengeful. But if your God is one that loves you and wants you to be free, then you won't be as much in theory. And who's losing out? A guy, God, that is telling you he can fend for himself. He doesn't need you to feed him. Well, we need God to feed us. So if he's not feeding us, then why are you worshiping him? Because God does feed us, but not the God that accuses us. The God that accuses us takes life from you. So when you say be a God-fearer, you're really talking about fear of Satan, because Jesus is the judge, Satan is the accuser. So if you're worried about accusations, you're not worried about God, Jesus. You're worried about this God that told Abraham to kill his son. That's because that's why they killed Jesus, killed the firstborn son, killed Esau. Then it's the Messianic age. That's when you become the firstborn. So this is all about martyrdom. That because they killed you, you killed them back. And then that's equality. I'm not feeling too good. I'm not sure what I'm saying. Peace.